Wall Street Journal. We talk about cutting down with alternatives.
All right. Hey, just as a reminder, if you're out there, it's a good thing to mute your phone right now. Just saying, that prevents some embarrassing moments later on when this gets all played back to, I don't know, hundreds of people. Anyway, my name's Gary Kirshner. I'm the communications director for the UDT SEAL Association. Welcome everybody to another, I want to say, episode of our continuing financial wellness series with Caliber. Tonight, it's kind of one of those nights where if you own a home and if you owned it for a long time, you've gained some equity in it, or these days, if you've owned a home like my son has in DuPont, Washington, and bought it for just over 400, and 2.5 years later, it's worth 700, right? So anyway, tonight we're going to talk about how to make sure that, you know, that wealth that you've gained, you can keep, and some of the strategies behind that. So with that, I'm going to pass this over to Michelle.
Wonderful. Thanks. Thanks as always, Gary. So appreciate that. So glad to have you guys all with us, those that are here with us live and those that will be watching this later. At this point, we are six. This is number 6. We are halfway through now the year. I'm very excited with our continuation and the themes that are running through this. And tonight we are doing part 2 of that wealth building conversation. And as Gary mentioned, tonight we're going to kind of concentrate on, okay, you've got your home. Now you think it's time maybe to downsize. Maybe you are just divesting yourself of some of your rental properties. We're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like and everything to kind of get your brain thinking about what this is. So as always, as we start into this, just a little bit a reminder of myself, I'm going to share my screen first and foremost. Let me share screen 2. Okay, share. So you guys should be seeing my screen that says Michelle Crumley. Is that correct? Perfect. So guys, just a real quick, those that have been with me, you guys now at this point know me. I'm Michelle Crumley, 30-year military, now veteran spouse. My husband retired here from SEAL Team 2 a little over 12 years ago now, 12 years today, actually, and have been in the mortgage industry for 20 years. And the education part of what we are doing is really what I'm passionate about and have built my entire career on. So I'm not going to go into all that stuff. You guys at this point have a general idea who I am. And again, just we'll be here same time, same channel next month as well, and we'll keep this going. I also, though, tonight, I don't have to do the heavy lifting by myself. I am joined by Liam this evening, who's getting to play in my sandbox this month instead of vice versa. So Liam, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Michelle. So career number 1, serve SOCOM guy on the Army side of the house. Had a lot of really good experiences working with East and West Coast teams and some of the guys in Hawaii on different mission sets, both in the Middle East and throughout Asia and places like that. When I separated from active duty, in 2015, I set up a firm that specializes in supporting SOCOM and our partners in the intelligence community with financial literacy, you know, retirement planning and things of that like. So Michelle and I met doing one of these for the Green Beret Foundation, and she invited me to come out today and speak to the impact of the 1031 exchange and also the cap gains that people see in their homes. So I appreciate being here.
Absolutely. So excited to have you. I love when we have guests. And as we talked about now at this point, 3 months ago, so we try to kind of keep that continuum going where we're talking about things as early as I think I'm ready to buy a house, to things now where we're talking about some estate planning and how to manage your investments. So this is actually, again, part 2. We had a conversation 3 months ago, and this time we want to talk a little bit about, okay, again, you've got the home. It's time now to do something with it, right? And how to make sure that you are protecting your investment, you're protecting yourself, and you're also trying to minimize that bite that Uncle Sam likes to take of that, which we all, you know, hurts a little bit. So As a reminder, wealth is not something that generally occurs overnight unless you are one of those 1 in a billion people that win the lottery or 1 in a million some, and it doesn't typically happen by accident. So we're going to talk a little bit again today about how your home is an investment. We want to really think strategically about that. So a couple of things that we are going to hit on. Again, I'm going to take just a few minutes and talk about if you are deciding whether it's time to sell, how to make sure that your home is sell ready. And then Liam gets to take us from there. We're going to talk about then, okay, you sell the house, you've got these net proceeds. What do you do with them? The financial advisor and him will have all kinds of wonderful ideas. And then we're going to talk about the capital gain considerations when you do sell. This thing called a 1031 exchange. I know I heard about it for the first time 15 years ago, and it probably was more like 14 or 13 years ago that I actually started to try to figure out what it was. So it is and can be extremely beneficial, but you need to understand it and determine whether or not it's the right move for you. And then we'll wrap that up with kind of that longer term, that estate planning conversation. So not just the tax idea or the what to do with those proceeds, but also to think through what this looks like the next generation out. So first, you guys, you've got a home, whether it's your primary, maybe you've got a second home, maybe you've got a couple of investment properties that you have acquired over the years, and you are determining, maybe you're just tired of being a landlord. I know I got very tired of that. It might be that it's time to maybe bring all of your investments into just one, your final forever home, and you want to use some of the equity out of the other properties and divest yourself. Maybe it's just time to start winding some of those things down. So you know that you're deciding that you want to sell. So then you got to kind of figure out, right, when is the best time based on your situation to do that? I know if you've got all the time in the world, spring, I know around my house with the cherry blossoms and the azaleas, the house couldn't look any better at that time of year. So if ideally I have all the time in the world and I can plan it that way, that is awesome. But sometimes you're not going to have that option. So looking around at what is the most ideal time frame based on your situation. And then understanding the market. Today, we are very much in a seller's market. So as the seller, you would be in the driver's seat. We are seeing on average, the homes are sitting on the market less than 30 days. They were up slightly from on the average of 15. I think we were hitting more like 18 or 19 last month that they were sitting out there if they were priced well. So you really are in the driver's market today as that seller, but to understand the market that your house is in that you are selling, and to understand then also, are you going to be using an agent or not, interviewing the agents, making those decisions about what you're going to do. And then it's also taking a really honest assessment of your property. What kind of condition is it in? Are you going to want it in tip-top condition so you can eke out as much of the profits as you can? Also means spending a little money, right? Doing some upgrades, maybe doing some repairs. Or are you just, I'm done, I want out, and I don't want to spend the money, even if at the time and energy, even if it would bring in a little bit more in value. So you're going to need to determine what you want to do when it comes to the property's condition, and then plan accordingly for any repairs that you need, those kind of things, right? Also want to make sure with all of your market research, you've priced the house accordingly. Are you okay if it sits for a while? Are you pricing it with the fact that it needs work? Are you pricing it because it's in tip-top condition, or you're pricing it because you need it to move fast? So really understanding your timeframes, motivation, the market, and then pricing the home. And then just kind of, again, coming back around, making sure that you've done cleaning, decluttering, sprucing, all those little feel-good things that doesn't add value, but it can be that deciding factor for someone to say yes to your purchase price, say yes to your home on the market versus someone else's. So just a couple little things. Again, if you have an agent that you have decided to work with, they will help you with all of this. And if you are doing it on your own, because it is a seller's market and you know you got this, then making sure that you're doing your homework. And there's all kinds, if you do a quick Google search on how to prepare your home or how to get sell ready, there's all kinds of resources out there. So that's my little take on, first of all, we want to make sure before you sign on that dotted line and that house is under contract, that you've gotten and thought through, done that proper planning to make sure that the home sells in the time frame and the way that you want. Then the fun part, right? You're under contract, the home sells. That's where I get to hand this off to Liam to tell us a little bit about what we need to consider, the options, the risks, the benefits that go along with this.
Well, thanks, Michelle. You're absolutely right. You know, the market's been really hot now for a while. And I know personally, I've seen that with clients that are in really attractive areas. You know, we heard about DuPont. You know, when I lived out in that neck of the woods, I saw all the time in DuPont, Lacey, home prices rising. I was just off the phone today with a SEAL Team 2 client of mine that's taking advantage of the market out there at the beach. So this is a really great tool, understanding capital gains and their impact to your taxes and the 1031 for estate planning and future planning for generations. So go to the next slide, please.
Which is more about you.
That's me again. I'll just say I resisted the urge to put a team guy photo there. So next slide. So I alluded to this. So my firm was established in 2015. We set it up so that way we'd focus on the individual and also provide these financial literacy programs. We really like to help the SOCOM and IC community and our partners through across USG because a lot of us have unique requirements and not everybody usually understands those requirements unless you've lived this life. So I'm happy to be here and I'm looking forward to going through this content. Next slide, please. So here's our outline for today. First, we're going to talk about capital gains considerations with regard to your home. Follow that up with Section 1031 considerations. You've probably heard of it called a 1031 swap in the news or on TV or media. And then finally, the so what is how can I leverage these two considerations for my estate planning, both for myself and future generations. Next slide, please. So just a little fun facts here. So about 63% of Americans currently own their primary residence. And this will be important with the content. And then 75% of them consider it a key component of their retirement planning. You know, the military population, the government civilian population has a pension generally, but a lot of the US population does not have a pension anymore. So they look at home buying as an anchor within their, you know, their plan for the future. So, you know, understanding that and how to take advantage of that is key because a lot of people buy their home, but then they don't know what to do with the proceeds Michelle referred to in the future. So we'll get into that. So capital gains taxes. So what are they? So capital gains are exactly what they sound like. It's the appreciation of an asset from purchase time to sell time. So in 97, the Taxpayers Relief Act was introduced. And what that did is it looked at the treatment of capital gains when selling your primary residence. So historically, Uncle Sam went in there and enjoyed a big portion of that capital gains. And where that really hurt people were in attractive localities, you know, coastal properties, metropolitan areas, the suburbs around metropolitan areas, things like that. Military communities, because we know there's a PCS season. So in 97, they decided to do a carve out where they looked at the single taxpayer, they looked at the married taxpayer, and they determined that $250,000 for the single taxpayer and $500,000 for the married taxpayer was a nice carve out where they could pocket that money and then go ahead and move into another home. They could invest for their future. They could retire to the beach, do what they need to do. So the interesting thing here is that's impacted by long-term and short-term rates. So what does that mean? So a long-term capital gains rate is an asset held 1 year or longer. A short-term rate is 364 or shorter. So shorter rates are your effective tax rate. So think your tax rate at the end of tax year. When you file your taxes in April, that's going to be your short-term capital gains rate. Your long-term rate is based on both your marriage status and your income. So just, I'm going to throw some numbers at you. I'm going to round them so they stick. But for a single filer without a married filing, 0% capital gains is up to $41,000. If you're married and filing jointly, it's $83,000. And if you're a head of household, it's $55,000. Then for 15%, it's 41,000 to 459,000 if you're single, 83 to 517 if you're married, and 55 to 488. And then if you're really doing well and you're above 459,000, 517,000, or 480,000, then you're in the 20% tax bracket. Generally speaking, most people that are actively working or are in that retired bracket will fall between that 0 and 15%. And we'll talk about timing that Michelle referred to, because depending on if you're living on your DoD pension and you say a VA disability coming in, you know, you have this unique ability to fall within that 0% tax bracket and lock in a lot of capital gains, even if you bust the 500,000 or 250,000 line. But we'll get to that.
Yeah, and
Next
Leah,
slide,
one of the
please.
things that I know that when we talk about these things, we know very much what these are and how it works. And so I'm going to ask a favor, and that
Sure.
is for like individuals like my little blonde self here, just to kind of be a little bit more layman's terms, I guess,
Sure.
or slow it down just a little bit, because I know a little bit, and I still go, oh,
Absolutely.
I think if I pay taxes, it means I made money. If I
Sure.
don't have to pay taxes, it means I didn't.
So at its essence, the capital gains part is what you paid for, well, what you sold it for, less what you paid for. That's what we're looking at. As far as taxes, you're right. So it's only going to be your taxable income. So, you know, you could have a lot of money made throughout the year, but say you're a small business owner, you can write most of it off. You know, VA disability can be a significant portion of people's retirement that's tax exempt. So when you do your taxes, whatever that number is that your accountant, that TurboTax, whatever the IRS is going to bill you at, your adjusted gross income, that's going to be the number that will determine your percentage for capital gains, i.e. how much money IRS is going to ask for out of it. Now, remember, you get a big chunk excluded. So if I buy a house in 2010 outside of Fort Bragg, my stomping ground, for 250,000, and I sell for 600,000, I'm married now. So as long as I meet, and we'll get to this, the use case and the ownership timeline, I can exempt all of that $350,000 from taxes in the future. And we'll deep dive that on a future
Okay,
slide.
so this that we're talking about right now is kind of capital gains in general, one, and then two, that
Specific to the
exclusion
house.
component then to the house that we're really going to go a little bit deeper in, right?
Correct.
Okay, so if I move to the next slide, right?
You got it.
Then we talk about, okay, tell
We
me
do.
about that a little bit.
All right. So when you own this home and you decide to sell, the timing is right, you're worried about paying taxes, the thing you have to look at is a few things. One, how much money am I going to make? What's my profit? So that's the very first thing we're looking at. So if I'm a single homeowner and I have $250,000 or less in profit, I get to pocket that and pay no taxes, regardless of whether I decide to purchase another home, etc. That's mine. The same thing applies if I'm married. If I decide to sell my house and I meet the eligibility and the use requirement, which I'll get into, I have $500,000 of profit, don't have to pay any taxes on it. So that's fantastic. So how do you get there, right? So one, it's got to be your principal residence. So is it my house? Do I have, so I've lived there, it's my house. The second, the IRS states that you have to have had the house for 2 of the past 5 years.
And so with that in mind, we are talking about here, the exclusion is only if it's your primary residence.
Correct.
There is not an exclusion at all, right? Your gain, if it's a second home or an investment property, is going to be held to capital gain taxes.
Yes,
Once we start talking
but
about the swaps.
yes, but we'll get to the 1031 and how you can leverage that. So
Okay.
there's a lot of tools in your toolbox here. So for a primary residence, we can exclude either 250,000 or 500,000, depending on your married status. For other properties, we talked about rentals. There's a lot of other tools, which we'll get to, where you can roll those profits into something else and keep essentially kicking the can down the road. And then we'll talk about The so what is if I'm planning on giving something to someone like an heir, you can avoid all taxes in that scenario. So we'll get to that at the end. So
Okay.
that's a win because no one wants to give the man money. And I see the chat. So what I'll do for that is I'll talk this slide and then I'll digest the chat and I'll talk about that for general discussion. And I'm happy to answer all questions at the end too. So as I talked to briefly, it's got to be your principal residence in this scenario for those capital gains exclusions. They tell you you have to live in it for 205 years. And that's really just a sneaky way of saying the government is saying, hey, you can only sell a home once every 2 years and, pocket this profit. And then the good news is if you have this scenario, like I had one of these outside of Bragg, I didn't even have to file anything with the IRS. I met the rules, the use test rule. So is it mine? Have I lived there 2.5 years? And we're good. The only thing that can sometimes be a little tricky, but you self-report is say I have the home and I'm engaged and my fiance moves in at year 1 and we sell at year 2. The government would prefer you wait a year because he or she has only lived in the house for a year. I'm just saying that is not something they check. But the IRS does put it out there. They want one or both people in the home for 2 of the 5 years so you can save the money. But there's not a form to file with that. As far as the question, so a house bought in 91 and paid off, which is great. So now it's worth significantly more in 2010. So at the selling point, if you say assume the selling point, how do we pay less gains? So what the government's going to look at, and I'll get to this slide, is they're going to look at your sale price less your purchase price plus any improvements you made. So if it's essentially zeroed out, no problem. The only thing the government is really looking for is have you made more profit? Say if you're married here, over $500,000. So as long as you haven't tripped that $500,000 line, you can pocket all of that money, even if it's about the same as what you paid for, and you have no problem.
And
So
I
does
know
that
that you
make
have
sense, Todd?
yeah, and you have a slide, I think, that talks a little bit about that. And I want to actually share some thoughts on that when we get there. So we keep us
Perfect.
kind of moving there as
Okay.
well.
Fantastic.
Now, what I love, and I think it is on your next slide that talks about when you are, nope, maybe it's after that talks about for the military, right?
Yeah,
talks
so
about
we can, if you want to quickly go to the next one, that just is the formula,
Okay.
because a lot of times people forget sale price, less purchase price. I literally did this on the Bragg house and my CPA was like, what are you talking about? Like, didn't you fix X, Y, Z? There's all these capital improvements. So keep track of that because that got added to my basis. So basis is essentially what you paid plus all your improvements. So, I was close to that 250. So he's like, you spent $4,000 putting in the vapor barrier. You had to fix the roof. You did this and that, home from hell. So I was like, okay, great. And honestly, all of those fees took me under the line and I got to net all of that potential profit for myself. So just remember that. But to your point, Michelle, yeah, the next slide, we should be able to get into the military exemptions, which are really important for our community.
So, and before we do that, then while we're right here, so as I think
Sure.
through, what I bought the house for, and Todd, what you bought your house for in 91, how awesome, and that you're going to sell someday way up here, is make sure that you've really kept your records, right? Because if there is that possibility that you're going to be over that 500,000 in net proceeds, you're going to want to be able to show from a capital gains standpoint the cost of redoing your kitchen, the cost of redoing the
Right.
bathrooms, what you spent to do all of those things, and have them documented, right? Have that documentation to support that, so you can subtract that off your proceeds, hopefully getting much closer to that exclusion amount than you might be otherwise.
And Michelle, this is a perfect lead in. So I originally talked about how much we're making. Remember, we said there were a bucket. So, you're not going to pay any taxes if you make under this amount on that first slide. You're going to pay 15% of that if you make up to 417. Yes, exactly what you're saying, Todd. All those expenses, that's exactly what Michelle's saying. Keep records of that. Anything that's considered a capital improvement, just whatever you're doing to fix your house. So where this really works well for, say, Todd, if he has more profit than say 500, even after all these expenses, depending on what your potential retirement is looking like in your income, you still may not pay taxes. So depending on what your DOD retirement is, because you get all your deductions and all that good stuff, you might still be able to pocket a lot of money. So that's where it's nice to be a military retiree, because we have our DOD, we have our VA disability, you know, we may or may not have retirement income, and then we have this equity we built in our homes, but we know VA doesn't count, and we know we have a, you know, standard deduction. So that's something to look at. And Todd, especially in your case, where you might be able to make more than 500 and might have a very minimal tax on it. It's just dependent on the person, if that makes sense.
It does a lot of, and this is where that proper planning becomes so important. There are so many little moving pieces. One can save you thousands of dollars, and another one you could give away a lot more than you anticipated of having to give up. But do tell me, because I got to take advantage of this when my husband and I were in Kodiak, Alaska for 4.5 years and moved back, and still had a year until we sold our original home and got, because it wasn't 2 of 5. We didn't live there 2 of the last 5 years, but we did get to take advantage of this.
This is fantastic. So I just dealt with this with a dual military couple of mine from on the task force side, worked together. They been all over. They bought a place outside of Stewart in Georgia. They literally were there 2 years or so, but you know, fast forward 4 kids later and they're in the same boat. So they didn't know they had this exemption clause. So in 2003, they realized with the op tempo being so high across DOD and especially in SOCOM, we needed to do something because families are PCSing all over, people were always deployed. So they gave us 10 years, and that's fantastic. So in Michelle's case, with you guys being in Alaska, you know, you're able to secure a renter, maintain your house, do what you need to do, whatever, and still reap the profit benefit of the exemption. So I'm really glad they codified that. And then also, even more importantly, 5 years later, they did a law to protect our spouses for those that have fallen. So they gave them more time. So historically, if someone, you know, Gold Star family had someone die or something happened, if you're a widower, you know, they're maybe not able to sell that property or they hit some of these timelines. So what they did is they can give them 2 extra years to sell and have they get the married exclusion. And, you know, this is not something most people think about in that moment, but when the dust settles and we have to look at our future and the way ahead, this is another law that makes a ton of sense to protect everybody. So those are 2 very specific military carve outs, especially for the active team guys that'll see this, that are very active in real estate, especially at the beach, you know, knowing that they have this window so they can go out and pursue pro dev opportunities and other things, you know, it's really important for how they plan for the future. As an anecdotal example, I was just talking to platoon chief, he's going to SOC North, and he doesn't want to give up his house right away because he doesn't know if he wants to rent it or whatever. And we brought this up, and I was like, well, you're sitting pretty in it was at Sand Ridge up there. And I was just like, maybe wait, because with all the price appreciation we've seen in Virginia Beach over the past 10 years, you know, he's gonna PCS back for at least one final assignment, you know, at the troop level or beyond. So, you know, he can rent it and still know he can have that exclusion. So he was very happy to hear that. Did I miss anything on that, Michelle?
Yeah, with the fact, Liam, that's military personnel have that 10-year versus 5, right? 2 of the last 10. At what point, like if somebody is separating or retiring, does that change back? Is it immediate, or is there a time frame that you have to still take advantage of that 10 years?
Yeah, so good question, good RFI. So the way it's written right now, because this couple's kind of in a weird situation, is there, and I'm not a state attorney or anything. The read is, you know, the active duty time, you're separating, etc. It's not written very directly. So they're pushing for hey, because he's transitioning to retire. He's like, we have time. I'm happy to get in there and research that more. Right now, what we're being told, it's, hey, here's your window, you know, your 10 years active duty. But like a lot of state and federal laws, they're written kind of in a somewhat opaque way. I would say as a planning assumption to be careful, plan on your tenure. Like for me, you know, I've transitioned, so I don't think I can get that anymore. If I could, it'd be great. but I'm not gonna bank on the opaqueness of the law, so I stick with the active duty timeline. But if he says his attorney figured it out, I will absolutely let you know, because that opens the aperture. But for planning, plan for active duty, and then it transitions back to the 5.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Okay. And Jay, important to be aware of home cost basis changing with spouse passing.
So he's talking about James, you're talking about a step-up provision, right? I'll let him post a second. So a lot of times, all right, good. So I'll touch this briefly, and then we can touch on estate planning. Thanks, James. So when you look at a surviving spouse, you look at an heir, a beneficiary, and all of these type of assets. The way the tax law is, it's called a step-up provision. So as an example, if something were to happen in the cost, so you have you have your cost basis and you have this new price, which everything's worth. If you leave it to an heir, the way the tax law is on it now equalizes and steps it up, and that's your new cost basis. So where that becomes important is if like a spouse passes and you're the surviving spouse, if your cost basis rises to present day, now you have an elevated, if you look at how much you can put away before paying taxes, your floor has raised. Similarly, when we get to the 1031s, it's the same idea. You can roll profit into other properties along the way. And then if you leave that, say you have $1 million in real estate in a property, and you're like, oh, this is going to be a huge tax bill that I've kicked to the future. Say you want to leave it to your kids or to a beneficiary. When you pass, the cost basis in that property you're gifting now goes to present day, and there's no tax requirement for those beneficiaries. So that's something we'll talk about on the last slide, but thanks, James. It's very important because as that basis shifts higher, it pushes up, your ceiling as to where the new line is for taxes. All right, so with that, that's a great lead in and I appreciate it. So the 1031 exchange or property swap, 1031 swap, essentially what we've already talked about, it's allowing you to push this tax requirement to the future. The way the IRS looks at this is it has to be like kind. So think and we're talking about real estate here. So real estate to real estate. What's amazing is there's no limit on frequency, which is kind of shocking when you think about it, but it really works in the best interest of those that are in really great real estate markets. Where I live about 2 hours from Bragg, there isn't a lot of people doing 1031s, but by the coast, a lot of families go out to the coast. You see it all the time because these coastal properties they're rolling a ranch into a 2-story, a 2-story into a 3-story just because of price appreciation. So it's a really great tool. So we're avoiding the tax event until we sell the property. And like I said, that's going to be dependent on your income for the year. So depending on what you make, you may have none, you may have a little or a little bit more, 0, 15, or 20. Or, and we'll get to that slide, if you're going to pass it on to someone, a beneficiary in the future, that basis is going to step up to present day. And if they sold on that day, then they're essentially minimizing all of their tax requirements. So it's a really good way for transgenerational wealth planning because you can gift it to a beneficiary, a child, surviving spouse, things like that. But we'll get into that.
When you said like kind to like kind, so real estate to real estate, obviously, but does it need to be like a second home to a second home or an investment property to a true investment property, or does that matter at all?
No, it's real estate. So a good example, I have a retiree that just bought in Connecticut and did well, and they rolled some into commercial real estate. They rolled some into, multifamily homes, residential through a structured product outside of what I do, because in the IRS's eyes, like you had a primary home, you have a ton of equity in it, but they were allowed to spread it all out and they had a little cash left over. And we'll talk about, they had a boot. So we'll talk about that at the end because they're going to have to count that. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so how do we get here, right? So in its most simple essence, we're swapping one like thing for the other, and it's between two people. Realistically, that's probably not going to happen because you're going to need an intermediary because of all the moving pieces with real estate transactions. And all of us here knows how that can be complicated with closing attorneys, escrow, things like that. So the way IRS looked at it is they wanted to give people an exchange timeline to facilitate this action. So at its most simple, a simple swap would be one property for the other. But like I said, generally speaking, you're not going to be able to sell and buy a property within a window like that to lock in the exemption and not pay taxes. So the government has given you a 180-day window with two specific rules. The 45-day rule refers to designating a replacement property. So you sell your home and you give your money to an intermediary because you can't take custody of your money. Because the idea is you're going to pass this money into a like vehicle on real estate property. They don't want you to have it and do anything with it because there's the temptation, there's the potential for taxes. Same with like a 401k rollover. So what happens is most people go to an intermediary, which we'll talk about qualified intermediaries in a second. And then they have 45 days to designate the property in writing to that intermediary. So I'm in a hot market, Virginia Beach, and I want to retire to the country. So I know I can be choosy here. Cost of living is lower. I can pick what I want. As long as I'm working with the qualified intermediary, I have a month and a half to go out and find that farm, find that what I want. So that's what you see a lot out here where I am. A lot of people will roll say a coastal property into acreage out here because you get more bang for your buck. So I found this property. Oh, go ahead, Michelle.
I was gonna say, so do you have to be under like a signed, completely ratified contract? Or
No.
do you have to be seriously looking and thinking about our
Correct.
market right now, right? You may make an offer on 8, 10, 15 properties before you get an
Right.
accepted contract.
Right. And an intermediary, and I'll talk this quickly. It can really be anyone, which is kind of crazy. It's not regulated. It could be, a banker. It could be someone like me if I had an escrow account, foot stomp, which, it could be an attorney that does this, real estate broker. So I'll talk about good lessons learned on that. But the requirement for the IRS is like a signed, notarized type document saying in, good faith, this is the property I intend to buy within the 6-month window, the 180-day window.
Okay.
So with that, so I have found my property. Now the second timing rule is I have to close, to your point, within 180 days. So, if I know like when I was just north of Bragg, Raleigh, Durham, it's really hot market, lose houses all the time. And then they're trying to do really truncated closing windows, but it's still a 3 to 4 week process at the fastest. So you have to be careful in your planning because the IRS says, hey, I gave you 135 days from the 45-day window. You should be able to get this done. Because what some people don't realize, it's a concurrent window. So the clock starts the second you start the process. So if you go at day 45 and you turned in your notarized form saying, I want to buy 123 Main Street, you've only given yourself 135 days. So conversely, if you're in like my market's honestly not that hot. So if I put something in the first week, I now have given myself 5.5+ months to go ahead and execute the contract and purchase it. So where this is important is, I said this isn't regulated, right? So you're essentially looking for a qualified intermediary or middleman that is going to receive funds, hold them, and then purchase the property for you. And this is the swap we're talking about when we talk about a 3-party exchange. It is rife with unfortunate stories about people being taken advantage of. I mean, the key things here you want to look at are they doing any, because they're going to charge a commission or a fee or some sort of fee structure. Are they preparing the proper legal agreements necessary to structure this correctly? How are they going to safeguard your funds? Do they have some sort of escrow or trust account? Is it commingled? Is it separate? Because I know personally, attorneys have escrow accounts, but a lot of that stuff gets commingled and earmarked. So like, how many of these have they done? Do they understand the IRS rules? There's a lot of stuff online saying they're qualified. There's a lot of people locally. I just really encourage those to really look into it because the things that stick out to me is how long have you been doing this? How many transactions in aggregate dollar size have you done? Because they may say, I've done 10 million of these, but if everything's $1 million coastal property, you've only done 10 of these in the past X years. Are you an expert, a SME at this? Or do you have someone that's done maybe 1,000 of these a year? So do your due diligence when looking at this, and then really look hard at where the funds are held. Is an FDIC insured trust or escrow type account, or is this Liam's bank account at Fortis Wealth Management? So, and then
I'll give you
don't be
my
afraid.
account if you want it.
Bring it down and see. So just look hard at that, because I said it's not regulated. Like, you know, when you manage money like I do as a fiduciary, there's a lot of rules and regulations with the SEC and FINRA. Unfortunately, FINRA does not regulate this. So just make sure you do your research and you're not taking advantage of. So what's in a reverse exchange? I talked about how I sold a property. I have 45 days to make a real and true offer. And then I have another 135 days to go ahead and buy it and execute that. Think of that's the reverse. Maybe I haven't sold my house in time, but I have found what I wanted. So the IRS allows for that. You can go ahead and use an intermediary and say, I want that house and I want to roll these proceeds into that. And they're going to facilitate that in reverse. I know that sounds complicated, but think of it this way. You're identifying a property for exchange in 45 days. You're still completing it in 180 days. You just haven't sold the house yet. So they're going to help facilitate that compliantly with the IRS. So what happens?
There's
Sorry, go ahead.
room there. There's room based
There's
on
room.
how life happens to still be able
Correct.
to use within the guardrails that are put up there to use that 1031 swap, that 1031 exchange process.
Absolutely. And just remember the key things here are 45 days and 180 days. So flash to bang, 180 days, this has to happen. The government will give you some wiggle room, whether you sold or not up front, but you have to have a good faith offer in on something notarized, basically within the first 45-day window. And then you got to get it done in the next 135 days. Otherwise, you're going to be responsible for paying potentially significant cap gains on your profit. So where you see this utilized a lot, Michelle talked about rentals, investment properties, really expensive homes, things like that, is if you're in an environment where you've done well, this is a way to just keep taking that profit and put it somewhere else. But sometimes you don't want to upgrade. Maybe, you know, you want to downsize. So, you know, you have $1 million. We know some of it's excluded. And then we have this delta of, you know, new mortgage amount. We rolled some of that in there to say there's 100,000 left over. Well, they call that the boot. And the so what here is that cash is going to be taxed as income. So sometimes people forget because like, well, I rolled it into a new property, but generally people roll equity into things that are more expensive. So then they still have what's left of the mortgage. They're paying that off. They're just kicking the can down the road on the profits. You invert that. If you're going from a big pot of cash, you're deploying less of that cash into something, the tax man cometh. They're going to give you your carve out provision for profits and whatnot. But if there's any extra icing on the cake, that's where they're going to look at how much money you make in a year because they're going to consider that extra income. So, and that's where you'll likely be in that 15 to 20% tax bracket, unless it's under that 80,000 if you're married or roughly 41,000 if you're not. So how do we avoid taxes? And we've already talked about this. James astutely brought up the step up provision. So what some people like to do is they know they're kicking the can down the road and maybe they have their pension, their VA money, they have a second career, all of these things. So maybe they don't have a requirement to sell. Maybe their TSP's done really well. Maybe they, you know, made a ton of money in their second career. They hold on to the property and then they're like, well, I don't want Uncle Sam to get any of this. What do I do? And that's where you look at the beneficiaries. So, you know, if, you know, it's a spouse, if it's a child and they inherit it, tax code currently, and Todd, I'll get to your question in a second. Current tax code allows for the step up. Now that like carried interest exclusions are sensitive because people see it as a way for quote unquote rich to keep protecting their wealth. But what they don't see is where I live, for example, there's 100-year farms everywhere. So this generation is the third or fourth generation to inherit the land. Well, this land is worth a lot more than in the Great Depression because there's a cell phone tower on it, there's solar panels, we got soybeans, we got commercial farming, et cetera. So, you know, each generation maintains the land and then it keeps stepping up. So no taxes, no taxes, no taxes, because the land might have been worth $100 in 1929 and it might be worth 20 million in our year, but the government allowed each time it got passed on for that cost basis to move up. Same idea with these 1031 exchanges. If you have a house you bought for 250, you know, it was worth $1 million, you take that $1 million, you put it in a new house, say now that property's worth $2 million, you're like, wow, I owe a lot of money in taxes, 2 million less 250 of that cost basis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it to a beneficiary, and when they inherit it, their cost base is that present day value of 2 million, there's no taxes owed. So if they sold it that day, they wouldn't have any taxes on that. And it's a great way for that multi-generational transfer of wealth. I know a lot of us, you know, serve for a lot of different reasons. So for me, it gave me a lot of opportunity I wouldn't have had. So because of that opportunity, I'm hoping to use my pension earnings for my kids to give them opportunity. So these type of things are attractive to me, or if I bought a property and can maintain it and keep it over my lifetime, I could give it to my kids and then they start fresh and potentially gives them something they could sell, they could live on, things like that. So
Liam, with that real
Sure.
quick. So one of the things that you had said, and have said a couple of times, and I just want to make sure that we are all well aware of that, is we're talking today's current tax laws. And we know that tax laws can change, good and bad.
correct.
Is there usually, when they're going to make a substantial change to something like this, right, that there's a lot of money potentially tied to, what kind of lead in do you usually have, or an idea of what might be changing, so you know how to quickly sell,
Right.
quickly not sell, take it off the market? How much time do you generally have?
Yeah, so if you look at like the legislative cycle, so there's a few issues that are always up for fighting about, you know, all the investment bankers and private equity guys with their carried interest, because it gets taxed at really low capital gains rates and they can make billions and billions of dollars. 1031 swap type money, that's always really hot. And death taxes, estate taxes, you know, the Trump administration bumped that up a lot. And that's always, you know, something that's available. So to answer that, I definitely follow this. So it's always red meat for everyone to fight about on the Hill. There are very powerful lobbies that are protecting these currently. I mean, because how do you tax the farming family? Like I have 4 generations here that have been on this land, and just this generation's done well, but daddy, granddaddy, and great granddaddy, you know, toiled in the field. So to answer your question, it's usually a multi-year initiative. And then it gets so watered down through the House, the Senate, back to the House, and there's such powerful lobbies to protect that. That's something. And, you know, Todd asked that question too. It's like, how do we know? How do we see the changes? Well, it'll get telegraphed. So you'll see, you know, in local, or not local, but major news, hey, we're discussing this. You know, state, federal representatives will reach out and poll people. I know, like where I live in East North Carolina now, people are very sensitive to it. Because we have 3rd, 4th generation commercial farmers, things like that. It won't happen overnight. And then what I encourage people is, you know, you go ahead and you look hard at if this wave is coming. So a good example, you know, the 22 million right now, 23 million, that's the estate tax exclusion. That will likely drop. But I have a client that works for a big trust bank as a VP of business development. They are spending millions to lot because they have billionaire clients. They're spending millions a year on lobbies, and they're a bank in Delaware, one of many to fight that. So there's a lot of elephants fighting these things. So I think for us that are kind of riding the waves as, you know, Main Street residential investors and real estate investors will be okay, but we will see it coming. It won't be, we'll wake up and then it'll go away. So ways we avoid taxes, we know we can use 1031. If it's tied into real estate, we can push it down the road. Investment accounts, you know, there's step up provisions in those, which is great depending on the type of beneficiary. So stocks have cost basis, so that's important. So, you know, if you bought Coca-Cola in 1950, like your parents did, and gifted it to you and gifted it to them, that cost basis goes up. So this whole concept really applies across like the larger investment, like populate pool of investment vehicles, real estate, you know, stocks, equity holdings, things like that. And then if you're worried about taxes too, you know, municipal bonds and things like that, that gives you, if you have a significant amount of money that say a capital gains exclusion and you're sensitive to taxes, there are tax-free vehicles available. And that's why I wanted to talk about what you can do with all of this money. We know 1031 is a vehicle just to lock in no taxes for that air, but what do you do for yourself? So if I can get $500,000 for free, no tax requirement when I sell my house, plus my cost basis back. So say I made $750, what do I want to do with it? Well, then that's dependent on what your goal is. You know, I'm 37, so I want to grow it. So I would put it into an account, understanding there'd be a tax requirement in the future. You know, if I'm retirement age, and maybe I have 100% disability. I have my DOD pension combined. I'm making 70, 80 grand a year, and I'd love some tax-free money. There's a lot of great vehicles that you can invest in that might kick off 3, 4, 5%, especially in a rising interest rate environment, where if I had $1 million, or excuse me, like $750,000, whatever it is, if I got 4% on that 5%, that might be $40,000 a year tax-free, or I can get even a higher amount if I'm willing to pay a little taxes. And again, if I'm under that threshold for zero, maybe I don't care what it is because I'm making less than $80,000, you know, on my tax receipts. So there's a lot of unique stuff you can do, especially if you want to give it away. And I encourage people to self-educate, you know, ask for good, impartial fiduciary type advice. You know, there's a lot of really smart people out there that can help you protect that wealth you've worked hard to, you know, build, and not just give it away in taxes. Because to your point you made earlier, a lot of times people don't know what they're doing and inadvertently pay taxes when they don't need to. It's kind of a good example for the team guys that are current. When I do these, they always tell me, like, don't take your untaxed dive pay, free fall pays, all the pays we got, and put it in a taxable retirement account. Because guys aren't thinking like, hey, this is just my paycheck. But there's ways to invest in tax-free things, you know, or after tax buckets. So same with real estate, like keep rolling it if you can afford to. If you want to gift it, you know, make it a rental. You just kick the can down around, the rental can kick off income. There's so many unique things you can do to take care of yourself.
And what I love with that is I think I'm fairly smart, and I've done a lot of individual research over the years, and I still go, wow, I could have done so much more with the right help, choosing the right advisor, choosing the right instruments. I think that is absolutely huge. And that goes to one of those underlying themes, which has been always find the expert, right? Do a little research, understand, know the right questions to ask, and find the right people that know that business that you can then work with in those situations. Do you have some questions that have popped up, Liam, that we need to address on your end at this point?
I think we're good. You can go to the next slide if you'd like. We talked about transgenerational wealth planning. We talked about cap gains exclusion. I mean, there was a thanks. The trotting got it, but and don't judge me. I had to put my SF thing out there. Michelle knows I like to make the SF joke, but I'll save it for a bigger audience. But no, I'd like to just open it up. If there's any other questions I can answer specific to this or anything, I'd be happy to help. Because you are right. I mean, finding an honest, you know, true answer to things can really help people in the long term. So I'm available if anyone has anything they'd like to send in the chat.
Yep, and your information is on this. So if you, again, we'll be sending out to everybody, right, that's on here, as well as that isn't, that are watching this later. Just freeze the video. This is Liam's information, and he'll be joining us some more throughout the year when we've got the need and want to have the discussion with our financial advisors. Has anything popped up on your end? Okay, so I left out one word in this because, you know, I have to make it PG for the caliber that's out there. But we know that prior proper planning avoids poor performance. And we want to make sure that we aren't leaving things up to chance whenever we have that opportunity. And by you guys choosing to go on this journey with the UDT Seal Association caliber, our friends that we are bringing in like Liam, then you are on that path to doing that proper planning. And I'm so excited to be on that journey with you. Before I hand this back over to Gary, we are 6 months now, six sessions. There were 12 sessions. We have been everywhere from discussing just, again, what is the VA loan, to what are all these pays and what income can you use and can't you use, and why some of that income is considered qualifiable and other times it isn't. We've walked through how to plan, right? That initial financial planning, building that nest egg, budgeting, thinking about retirement, 401ks, IRAs, TSPs, all of those wonderful acronyms. Came back around to talk about credit. So we have a whole hour discussion about credit scores, how those decisions that we've made in the past either positively or negatively impact what we can do today. We've talked about the kind of, as you start thinking about purchasing, the purchasing ins and outs, how to think about what property you might want. And do you want to be a landlord? Do you want to be own a second home that maybe is a short-term rental? All of those things that are there to today, where we talked about, okay, now we've got the house and we might want to be downsizing or going ahead and divesting ourselves. As we move forward, just to set the tone, we're going to be talking in July about what funds can you use for down payments, closing costs, reserves. What are those assets that can be used, can't be used, and again, going into why, so that I don't know about you guys, but for me, if I understand the background, the reasoning, even if I don't like it, at least I understand it, and that gives me a better situation to be moving from. We're going to then talk about, okay, while you are owning the home, what are the things that you need to think about as a homeowner or a landlord, from repair and maintenance to accessing the equity, right, that you've got there, to if you want to rent it or thinking about selling. We'll go into a little bit more detail there. Assumptions for our VA and FHA loans that are out there, or if you're looking at buying, how that assumption process can work. I mean, what happens if you hit financial difficulties? So we'll be talking about that. And then we'll also be getting into some more of that wealth, some more of that estate planning, what to do in sandwich situations when you're taking care of your kids and you're also taking care of your parents. So we'll be talking about a lot of different things. So love that you are continuing to follow along with us. Gary, I'm going to keep us way on time today. I like that. I'm not scrambling at the last minute going, oh, I better shut up. And Gary, I want you to take us home today.
All right. Thanks so much. Oh, guys, thanks. This was really, for me, a very valuable session. Just so that everybody knows, the SEAL Veterans Foundation, we have established a YouTube channel, and all of the previous seminars are on that YouTube channel. So, and it's public. Anyway, so just go to YouTube, search SEAL Veterans Foundation, and you will find it and be able to watch any of the previous episodes that you might have missed. So again, it's the SEAL Veterans Foundation YouTube channel. So there you have it, everybody. Thank you so much for being here this evening. We look forward to seeing you next month. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it, everyone.
Thank you very
Thanks
much,
for
everybody.
participating.
Bye.